just sort of going back into, I guess, your transition to art. Yeah. So how about we start there? How did you actually get into abstract art in the beginning?
Well, I have to say that I was sort of an abstract painter from kindergarten onward. I was doing these de Kooning-esque type of paintings like in the first grade when everybody else was doing realism. And I kind of kept on with that. Oh, through high school, I would say. I mean, my mom had me in painting classes all the time. I did a lot of art when I was a kid, and it never looked like anybody else's. It was always kind of abstracted. And then, I took a long hiatus from art. I went to college. My parents had said, you have to be able to earn a living. You can't go to art school, blah, blah, blah. So I got a bachelor's degree in English at UCLA. Then I went to Loyola Law School in Los Angeles and became a criminal defense lawyer at the appellate level for many years. And I didn't really get back to my art until I was like 46. And I was like, had been feeling the urge for a long time, but was kind of too scared to start. I thought, oh, I'm too old. I don't have any talent. It's going to be too difficult. Who do I think I am to think that I could do this? But I just kind of started in and it sort of morphed from there. But I was never that good of a drawer. So it didn't really make sense for me to try and like render these perfectly done like portraits or, landscape scenes or whatever. I kind of stuck to the abstract thing and kind of started with a series of abstracted figures that I did for a number of years. And I finally stopped that when the gallery that showed them here in Santa Fe, the people retired like in 2019. And I kind of just came to the end of that road with that series. But then I was doing abstract, paintings all along then.
So interesting. And just in that like college period and when you started to work as a lawyer, were you doing any art on the side or did it really
Nothing.
just nothing?
Nada. Okay. The
Okay.
only art I did when I was like in my 30s, say, was when my kids were toddlers and we were painting in the garage together and, doing projects like that then. And, whenever they would have a school thing they had to do that involved art, of course we were doing it. But that was it, you know.
Yeah. So interesting. So what was it inside you, or like, how did you get to the point where you said, okay, I'm ready to make that leap? Did you sort of start doing it on the side of your career, like your defense lawyer career, or was it you just said, okay, I'm finished with this and I'm going full time with?
No, it was on the side, definitely.
Okay.
What happened was, I wound up buying several large abstract paintings for my home. And, they really resonated with me. They really spoke to me. And then I would look at them every day and I would think, I want to do that. I want to do that kind of thing. But it took me a period of a few years to actually do it. And then my spouse came over one day. I had known him because he had remodeled my house years earlier and we kind of met up by happenstance like 15 years after that. So he could tell by my home furnishings that I was interested in art and really loved it. And he was sort of a fledgling painter then. And he brought over paints and a piece of wood and said, why don't you try something? And that kind of started it from there. He brought over acrylic paint. I'd been an oil painter when I was a child, so I didn't really know anything about acrylics, but that kind of got the ball rolling. Then I went to, let me think, a couple of courses at the local civic park in the area that I lived in and that kind of thing. I started taking little workshops and maybe courses that lasted for a month.
Okay, interesting. Did you
Yeah.
did you start to do, I don't know if what period this was, but were you doing any online workshops at that time as well, or was it
No, I
in
wasn't doing any
person?
workshop. This goes back to like the year 2000 when I
Okay,
when I
okay.
started again.
So online art courses weren't really around at that period.
No, they weren't
2000.
around
Yeah.
and I wasn't qualified to do them anyway.
Yeah.
So we moved to Santa Fe in 2002 and I really started painting in earnest, although I was a full-time lawyer still. And I could do my work remotely because of the kind of work I did. I didn't have to show up in a courtroom very rarely. I would just fly out to California and do that. I did appeals, which is all reading and writing. So I had a home office. So I was doing that. And the way I got into teaching workshops at all was in 2012, the West Texas Watercolor Society, which is based in Lubbock, Texas, called me up and said, we want you to teach a loosening up workshop to our painters. And most of those people there did very tight, realistic, tiny paintings. That was, the genre. So I said, okay, I'll do that. And they gave me actually a 2-year lead time. So it gave me plenty of time to figure out how I was going to do that. What was going to be the mode of me doing that. And I guess Facebook was pretty big then. So I went on Facebook and I invited 6 people that I did not know in Santa Fe to come for a free weekend workshop at the studio so I could try my stuff out on them and see what they thought, see if they thought it was good.
Cool.
And everybody loved it. So that became the first workshop curriculum for that initial live program, where I think there were 11 women, and there were no men came to that class, 11 women, and they just loved it. I think it was a 3 or 4 day workshop. I can't remember,
wow.
But that got the ball rolling. And then I thought, well, maybe I should think about this as sort of a retirement plan when I quit the law and beef up my art thing. And I had been in galleries all along too, but I couldn't devote the time, the whole business side that I needed to because of the having to earn a living,
Yeah.
So yeah, that's how that whole thing got started. And then when COVID hit, I realized I was going to have to take the show online. There was no way that I couldn't have anybody come to the studio. I'd had a whole year's worth of workshops where I had to give everybody their money back. And I had the year previous to COVID, I had done an in-person workshop at my Santa Fe studio with a woman that I'd met at a workshop in Florida that I attended. And she and I decided to do this live workshop. We had 6 people. Everybody loved it. And we were going to do it again in the summer of 2020. But I said to her, we're going to have to recreate this course online. So we each took a class on how to do an online class, which, that was when they were first coming out. And we each did our own online class first, and then we did the joint one. So I was doing my first online class while I was taking the class. And I actually finished my class at the time I finished watching the program that I was trying to learn from, because I felt that time was of the essence, because everybody was starting to get on that bandwagon and we were going to be, the playing field got increasingly crowded in 2020 and 2021 for online courses. So that's how that is the main reason that I did it. But at the same time, in maybe 2017 to 2018, I had a friend, an artist friend, who was creating a huge online program. And I could see that how much time it was taking her to do this. And it was like a huge undertaking, which is why I originally hesitated from doing it. I mean, we didn't know the tech very well. We didn't know how to do this. And we wound up filming it. My husband filmed me with my cell phone, basically. And a photographer friend of mine set up the lights, how to do that. So it was kind of, I don't want to say low class. Let's say it was low tech. But, I've watched it recently, the first one, and it still looks okay. The fact that we didn't have some fancy video camera didn't really make the difference.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that holds a lot of people back in that early phase of thinking about running an online course. Is I think where a lot of people are used to seeing the master classes,
Right.
sort of really high-end production, high production costs. But ultimately, people want to see you and they want to see, in this case, your artwork and your process.
Right.
And an iPhone camera in a lot of situations does that, very, very well. Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter unless you have a completely horrible production. I mean, I had a professional edit all the, the cell phone videos, and he did a great job. I've seen other courses that have much higher production value, for lack of a better term, and they don't really. Usually the instructors are dressed in white. They're in like a white room and it looks like a forensic lab. It just doesn't have the same feeling, as being in somebody's studio, somebody's real studio.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. I think people can really feel that if they feel that iPhone footage gives a bit of a, more personal, closer feel.
Right.
So that's really really cool to hear. I'm glad that didn't hold you back in the early phases. I'd love to
No.
ask about your workshops. What were, so like prior to getting to the COVID and realizing, okay, I need to create an online course, what were the workshop, like, was that like really a consistent thing? Were you doing them weekly, monthly? Were you just
I
doing
was doing them a couple times a year. Okay.
Okay.
Because I was still, like by that point, I was doing the law maybe 70% of the time. I had cut back a little bit because I was getting tired of it. I did that work for 40 years. I mean, it was a long time.
Yeah.
And I basically, like, the online course was basically a beefed up version of the in-person course that I did. That's what I started with. But I would do like 6 people, maybe 3 or 4 times a year during different seasons to give everybody, an opportunity to come at the time of year they wanted to come.
Okay, got you. And were they quite intensive for you to be able to deliver? Were they, I guess, at the end of the few days, were you sort of quite exhausted? Because I think some of those workshops can be, I guess, quite intense from an instructor
Oh, they are
perspective.
intense for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would
What are the
kind of
biggest
gauge,
challenges?
the intensity varied with who attended. I mean, some people can handle a more intense experience than others can.
Mhm.
For example, my partner and I recently had 2 back-to-back 6-person workshops at my Santa Fe studio. And some of the people, it was 9 to 5 every day for 5 days, which is a lot. And a lot of the people, they don't paint that long every day. I do. My partner does. So we're used to it. But they were tired. And we had to sort of kind of work in more breaks, and that kind of thing to make them last 5 days.
Paint more.
Right.
Yeah. Fair
Exactly.
enough. That's cool. That's really cool. So now shifting gears a little bit to back to you as an artist.
Uh-huh.
How do you balance these days between, because I know you're still actively teaching, like how do you balance between, producing your artwork yourself as an artist and on the teaching side? How does that all fit in together? What does a typical day look like for you these days?
Okay. Well, the typical day is in the morning hours, I'll do like business related matters. I'll look at online and see if there's anything I need to know about that other people are doing that I want to think about. I'll plan in social media posts, whatever it is I have to do, I do. I usually get to the studio about 11, I would say. Stop at there's a coffee shop right nearby. I stop there for a few minutes, then go to the studio and kind of, wander around for like maybe 10 minutes to kind of make friends with the space again for the day. And then I'll just start in and I can, usually stay till about 5, you
Oh,
know,
well,
uh,
how much art are you producing in any given month?
um, it's hard to say that because this year I've been derailed for a couple of reasons. So my production's been way low. Usually I can do 100 paintings a year, I would say between 80 and 100 a year. Hmm? Yeah.
What size are we talking here? Those pieces?
I love to work large. And by that, I mean 72 by 60 inches, or another favorite size of mine is like 65 by 55 inches. I don't do that many small paintings. Now, maybe midway through the year, I went to a collage workshop as a student in California, and I got very intrigued by that whole process. And I spent like maybe a month and a half doing nothing but collages that were like 24 by 18, 20 by 16. So that's I haven't worked that small in a long time.
How
So
did you find that actually? Was that
I
quite
found it
challenging for
very
you?
fascinating, very meditative, like putting a puzzle together. It sort of tapped in more of the lawyer side of my brain, I think, in a way. It
Interesting.
wasn't as expressive, I would say, as my
Okay.
abstract painting practice is, you
Interesting.
know.
And
So it's different, but I'm enjoying it. And I think I'm going to probably start with that in my new studio this weekend.
okay, cool. And as an
Yeah.
artist, do you seek out other artists' online courses as well? Do you like to go often to other
Occasionally I
workshops?
will
Like,
do that.
yeah.
I will do it occasionally. I don't really feel like I will do some of the mini courses. I don't have the time to undertake like a 12 module class, online. I don't want to make that kind of time commitment at this point.
Mhm.
If there's something that interests me that's short and sweet, I will do it.
Yeah. Okay. Sort of extract a couple of the big
Yeah.
ideas from it
Right.
and get
Yeah.
away.
And I think a lot of people are sort of burned out on the long programs that are super expensive. There's too many offerings now that are under $100,
Yeah.
that you can get way more for your money that way than a class that's like 1997, that's, 6 weeks long or 2 months long, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
I think
So
there's a less of an appetite for that now.
how do you balance in your own like online courses and stuff now this, that challenge that you just mentioned of less appetite for longer content, longer modules, courses that a lot of hours of, video content to sit through? How have you
Well,
sort of balanced that?
none of my courses were as long as many other ones in the first place. Like the first one I did in 2020, it's like maybe a total of 3 to 4 hours of video plus handouts and that kind of thing. The course I'm just launching today is about 45 minutes of video, with 2 handouts, and it's like $27, to start with. So I'm mindful of people's attention span. That's another issue, is I think over this whole COVID thing and all these million workshops that have been put online, people's attention span is not huge at this point in time.
And what do you think for people that I'm not sure what your customer base is, if it's mostly like really beginner people that have not done abstract art before, but what do you think are some of the big things that hold people back from starting with abstract art?
I think that a lot of them think they can't do it. They think it's maybe too hard, which it is harder than people think it is, than the average person who's not an artist. They always say, oh, my child could have done that. Well, they probably couldn't have done that. I think that's the main thing. People think they can't do it. They think they have no talent. They're maybe too old. A lot of the people that are my students had big careers in something, you know. They were doctors, lawyers, they were in finance, whatever. They had their own businesses, they were designers, and they're coming to this later in their life. And in a way, they want to attack it the same way they attacked their higher powered career, So in a way, that's good because I have a lot of people who are diligent. Let's say that they really want to do it right, and they throw themselves into it, which is good.
Yeah. How do you balance that in abstract art of wanting to do it right and also letting loose and letting it?
Well, I mean, in my courses, I encourage people to experiment and just throw themselves into it and not worry about the result. It's the process. And they can worry about the result later once they've had the feel of it for a while. I think the main thing that when people finally really embrace the idea of taking a risk, exploring, and not worrying about the outcome and not worrying about wasting paint, which is expensive for sure. If they just do that, they make way more progress.
Yeah, good advice. What do you find most challenging about teaching people art?
The most challenging thing I find is that of people not being willing to follow advice and instruction, that they want to do it their way, even if that's not the most efficacious way to do it. Even though if they just, would take a leap of faith and try what a teacher is explaining, they might make more progress. So to me, that's the biggest challenge I have faced, is people abjectly not following directions.
So is it mostly beginner, like really beginners that are making that mistake, or is it also
No, not really, not necessarily, I've had people who say they've been painting a couple of years, and they're older women who are retired from whatever it is they used to do. They're just doing it their way or the highway. That's it.
Even though they're at your workshop.
Exactly.
But then what do you think their motivation is then to join? Are they really interested to just be in a creative space with other people, share the process?
That's a lot. That's a lot of it. I think that's a lot of it. And, they say they want to learn something, and I don't think anybody walks away from one of my workshops not having learned anything. They absorb something, whatever that might be. And oftentimes whatever that something is propels them to another level ultimately, if they work with it like for a while when they get home.
Yeah. That's cool. And so to the complete beginner out there, that has never done abstract art, maybe they're in a full-time career, maybe they're a lawyer.
I've
And
had
like,
many of them.
yeah, I bet you have. I bet you have. And they're like, well, I'm seeking some creative outlet, which I can imagine is maybe a big motivation for a lot of people. Where should they get started? Like when it comes to abstract art, do they just go get some supplies and get an online course, get started, or what would you suggest to them?
Well, I would say, I mean, when I started, there was no online courses. I just went and bought a bunch of paint and canvas and paper and just started trying to do something, not very well, but I tried. And then I went to a couple of in-person workshops. I think somebody should like play around for a little bit on their own and then start taking some workshops. Like, for example, I have an online one on abstract fundamentals, which is a good place to start. You learn a lot about some of the basics, and then you can like maybe go from there. I think a mistake that some people make is that they try and take too many workshops too soon. You know, like I had somebody come to a workshop in person this summer. That was in July. That was her sixth workshop of the year. And I could see that she was getting burned out on the whole thing because it's too much. Everybody has a different way of approaching it. So she had too much confusing information in her head that was actually impeding her rather than propelling her forward. So I would say if I was a beginner, I would maybe take 2 workshops a year, maybe 3 at the most, depending on how long they were, if they were in person or whatever. Because it gets kind of expensive to take a lot of in-person ones if you're not local to that area.
Yeah, no,
There's
totally.
all the travel expense.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good advice. I think a lot of
And that's one of the beauties of the online program. I mean, because it's way more cost effective. And there's a lot of people who maybe have a health issue or they're older and they don't really want to travel so much. So they still can participate, in an online way.
how do you feel about online live workshops?
Well, I've thought about it, of doing it. I've never really, I actually say I watched one and I thought that the problem with it was the tech aspect, that it was not well set up. So, if I were going to do it, I would have to make sure that it was set up properly. And I just haven't really had the time to even think about that. But it would be the next frontier for me to try that, I think.
Yeah. Do you think there's an appetite in general for that?
I don't know because I've seen way less of it offered recently. But I think it would be worth a shot to see how it would play out.
Yeah. I feel like over the last few years, and I've mentioned this on other podcasts, where I feel like there was, in the early stages of online education, most of it was in some ways an online live format. So a
Right.
lot of people were doing live webinars, live workshops, because they
Uh-huh.
thought, okay, I've got to take that workshop that I'm doing in person and now do it live online. And people started doing that. And I think that was really sort of the initial boom. And then people started saying like, well, what if I just gave people the recording, and then obviously that's very appealing from the scalability and profitability
Right.
standpoint. It's just quite passive if you can sell that, evergreen course over and over again. And now I think, we've sort of gone back on I get the sense there's a bit more because the market is a bit more saturated with, for example, art courses or any online education courses. Every field is more competitive.
I agree.
That there is a bit more of an appetite for, hey, I want to see Julie in action live, and maybe there's a chance that I can put my hand up and ask a question on a call.
Mhm.
And I think there's a bit more, people sort of interested in that now because they've probably got a lot of experience with doing the recorded online course. And maybe they're like, I'd love to ask a question or get some feedback on this,
Right.
So yeah, curious to see if you ever go down that path.
Well, I have a friend who's moving back to Santa Fe like in the next month who would be the person who could help me make this happen technically. So once he gets settled in, maybe we'll talk about how we might make that work.
Test the waters with that. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
And last question, how do you feel about like the biggest differences would you say that you find of, teaching in an online course versus in person? What are those what are the pros and cons of each? What's your personal experience with both of them? What do you find the biggest differences between?
Well, I think with the online program, a person who's taking whatever the class is has to be disciplined and motivated. Okay. Now, my courses all have a Facebook community, private community that people can join and they can interact with each other there and ask questions. People can email me with questions, I used to have a Zoom component to my online classes that people could, it was like once a month. Sometimes we painted together. Other times it was a question answer, but I discontinued it this year due to lack of interest. I mean, nobody was showing up anymore. People, I think, were over it, basically.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the online thing is good to get started with and maybe take some specialty courses. Like I have a mark making class that people seem to like. I have a class on, focusing on contrast in your painting that people like. And then, they can interact with me in the Facebook group. In the in-person experience, people in the last maybe 2 years or year and a half, they want to come live now. That's a big thing. That's why I can fill my classes up in 5 minutes. It's, everybody wants to do it. And I only have 3 people at a time, which also is a big selling point because it distinguishes me from everybody who's doing 6 to 14 people at a time.
Yeah.
So if somebody comes to one of my workshops, they're getting an intensive experience with a huge amount of personal attention.
Yeah.
And when I ask people, ask them to give me an evaluation at the end, that's the first thing they say. I love that it was only 3 people. I felt like we bonded. It was a close knit group, that kind of thing, which is good.
And
I think in the in-person thing, you can push people forward faster. I don't want to say by making them do something, but by encouraging them to do whatever it is they need to do to move, to propel themselves forward.
Yeah.
Whereas it's hard to do that when it's an online situation.
Yeah, there's a lot more self-responsibility. And I guess people get stuck is, as you said, they get to that point where they're like, I'm stuck, I'm going to take a break. Whereas if they were in workshop with you, you'd be like, come on, keep going, maybe, help them on the spot. So I can imagine that progress.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And, I debate between how long to make these in-person experiences. My partner and I do 5 days with people. And that's actually, I think it's a little bit long. My ones I'm going to do in 2025 are going to be 3.5 days because a lot of my students told me that they were tired after 3 days and they wanted to go home and rest and then employ what they learned and, continue on that way. Some people want a weekend thing because they still work, so it's kind of that's a moving target for me.
Yeah. Are you doing all the workshops in Santa Fe in your hometown?
Yeah, I am doing all my workshops in Santa Fe. I'm doing one in November in New Orleans at a school called Paint Space NOLA. That'll be the first time I've gone, anywhere else in a long time. My Florida partner and I have done workshops at her house. And of course we do them in my studio and we'll be doing one in April. That's going to be a 5-day one.
Have you had like your audience ask you, say, hey, come to LA, come to New York and do it? Have you had?
I have. They asked me and I say, you have to put together a group and then I can do it. I said, I'm not going to try and market something that I don't know if people will show up.
Have you ever thought about just an idea like putting out on Instagram on your email and say, hey, is there people here that would be interested in a 3-day workshop in New York? If so, let me know. Like, have you ever done something like that?
Yeah. I mean, one of the problems is finding a suitable space to have it.
Mm.
You can only charge X amount of money for these workshops. And if you have to rent an expensive place to do it, then like, what's the point?
And fly there and stuff. Yeah. It's a lot. It adds up pretty quick.
The economics of it become more difficult when you go out on location, so to speak.
Yeah.
But it's possible. I mean, there are people who have big enough studios, private studios, that they would say, sure, I want to be in your class. I'll make my space available,
Yeah.
But I haven't really tried that yet, but it's another option on the table for sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Julie, so good to have you on here. Thanks for sharing
Thank you
with
for
us.
having me.
And yeah, good luck with the rest of your workshops and courses for the rest of the year. And if people
Thank
want to
you.
learn more about you, your art, or your workshops, where should they go?
They can go to my website, which is julieschumer.com. They can go to my Instagram account, which is at Julie Schumer Artist or at Abstract Workshops. Those are the main places.
Awesome. We'll put them in the show notes. But yeah, Julie, thanks again, and have a lovely
Thank
afternoon.
you.
Cool.